Welcome to Zen and the Art of Real Estate Investing. What if you could learn from experienced real estate investors, find out what got them to where they are now, get insight into their daily habits, and take these insights to inspire your own growth? Each week, Jonathan Green shares an in-depth look at the mindful approach to real estate investing. Jonathan is a lifelong real estate investor, advisor, and coach, as well as the founder and team leader of Streamlined Properties. Whether you're looking to start from scratch, get to the next level, or just for a straightforward and honest approach to real estate investing, Jonathan seeks to provide a free mentorship program you can take with you anywhere. Now, here's Jonathan.
Thanks for showing up for another episode of Zen and the Art of Real Estate Investing. And we're going down the self-storage rabbit hole today with an industry veteran, Mark Helm. He wrote the book called Creating Wealth Through Self-Storage, and he also has a company called Resolve with his partners. And Resolve can serve as both owner's representative and general contractors in the storage field. We get into all of it and Mark's extensive history in storage right now. This is episode 221 of Zen and the Art of Real Estate Investing with my guest, Mark Helm. Mark is a veteran in the field of self-storage and real estate. He's the author of Creating Wealth Through Self-Storage, co-owner and principal broker of Nexus Commercial Advisors, the developer of the self-storage financial analysis software, the Storage World Analyzer, which I'm definitely interested in. He's also the owner of several storage facilities, a self-storage developer, investor, speaker, consultant, and trainer, and the co-owner and partner of Resolve. Mark, welcome to the show.
Good to be here. I need to come on more often to hear that intro.
Yeah, some people say, that I should call them every morning and just give them that intro. But you're a veteran in the field, so I really appreciate having this conversation with you. When was the first time you were interested in real estate? Because I know it goes back a long time, like me.
May 1, 1985, I got my real estate license.
When you got your real estate license, was your plan to be a commercial agent at that time, or were you just trying to figure out what to do in real estate?
No, it was actually to earn extra money. I was a paint salesman of all things. And when I came out of college, inflation was running at 17%. Everybody thinks we have high inflation now.
I know, right?
The interest rates were running 15 to 17%. And I can remember, so I got a real estate license just to supplement my income. And real quickly, like within a couple months, my broker at the time said we had the Homes magazine. I don't know if you ever remember that.
Yes, I do.
My broker said, well, if you get 9 listings and can fill a page up, I'll put your picture on that page. And I said, really? You do that for me? Yeah. And I went out and listed 9 for sale by owners. I had no idea that was hard work. I just did it because, working with housewives scared me to death.
Yeah.
But within a month, I got that page in the Homes magazine with my picture in it. And I remember the Friday, May 1, I walked into my paint sales job and my boss threw that magazine down on the counter and said, you're either in the real estate business or you're in the paint business. Now, keep in mind, I have not closed a deal in real estate.
Right.
So I said, I think I'm in the real estate business. And took off from there.
Yeah, well, it's funny, though, because you had to make that choice before you got the first commission check. Most of us who, as agents, the first commission check, you're like, wow, this has scale, because those commission checks can be big even back then, because it all happens at once instead of a steady inflow of paint jobs, like you said.
Yeah. Something to be said about being naive sometimes.
Yeah. Well, you must have had experience, though, talking and being able to, because listings are very hard to get, especially when you're new. But I suppose that working the paint jobs and understanding what people need helped you when you first started to try to get into it, and now still helps you as a real estate investor over the years.
Yeah, sales, I was, regardless of what you do, what business you're in, sales plays some role in it. And even as a teenager, I remember I sold vacuum cleaners door to door. So the idea of cold calling didn't scare me. But the truth is, I just was kind of naive and didn't know a lot. I'm not one of my super strengths is sometimes I'm willing to take action regardless of whether I know the path or the outcome. Now, that can hurt sometimes, but that's kind of like a trait of mine.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's a good tip, though, for real estate investors. It does, a little bit generate what type of risk you're open to. But if you're willing to take action and then it doesn't go perfect, it's more of a pivot instead of a failure. Do you agree with that?
Yes, absolutely. Absolutely.
Yeah. So, well, when did your real estate investing start? Because I know you're getting in, you got a lot of things going now as a young, a young person. But when did you start thinking like, hey, maybe this could be something else in terms of investing as opposed to the agent business?
Probably 10 years, 8 years into my business. So what happened is I quickly evolved. I quickly went into commercial real estate. I ended up switching out of a residential company and going with a developer. They built retail and flex space. They would build it. I would lease it up. I got to sit in the rooms where the owner with the yellow pad would kind of look at land and scratch stuff out. And I saw how developers think. Or at least this developer thought. And then slowly, as a real estate agent, I went into the office business of all things in Louisville, in Kentucky, as a broker. And I would basically sell mostly downtown Louisville B-class office buildings, but I would sell those to investors. Then I formed a management company that would manage the buildings and lease the buildings out, renew the tenants, and basically put a plan in place to increase the value of these buildings. And then they would sell it and go into the next one. And so I was in office management and leasing business. And slowly I went through the CCIM designation. And in 1995, I got my CCIM designation, which is kind of like it isn't a PhD, but it's like a master's degree in commercial real estate.
Yeah.
But more importantly, institutional players will often work with CCIMs only. So I'm in this office business, going along pretty well. What I noticed about the office business was that we were pretty good at, when you're in the office business, you're in the tenant retention business. That's really the business you're at. We were renewing leases at probably 86%. But even back in the 90s, to renew a lease, it cost about $5 a square foot, carpet, paint, renewal commissions. For the tenants that moved out, it was nothing back then to spend $40 a foot. Redoing the space. I can remember countless times, dumpsters going in alleys, chutes coming out windows, stuff that had been put in 5, 10, 12 years ago, going down a chute. And then you reconfigure the space to get a 5-year, 7-year lease with a new office tenant, plus all the commissions. So our NOIs on the properties we were managing were going up, but below the net operating income. And the net operating income minus expenses, as we know, that determines the value of the assets. But very often the owners would be ponying money up all the time because of all the costs below the net operating income line in the debt service line. And I real quickly saw that it's great like leasing and managing, but that's certainly not an asset class I'd ever want to be in. So I got my CCIM designation. I'm rolling along as a broker. I was making good money, but I also spent a lot of money on my lifestyle. Yeah. And I got this call within a month of getting my designation from a REIT in the self-storage space. So I got this call and he said, we're looking for storage in your market area. Kind of gave me some of the parameters and said, can you help me? Well, like a hot tip, if you call a real estate agent and ask them to help you find property, there's usually only one answer. The answer was yes. So here I am taking this acquisition director of a REIT out to look for self-storage. Now, I thought self-storage at the time, like most people, was a silly, stupid little business.
This is mid-90s, right?
Yes. So 95. 95 was a silly, stupid little business for, mom and pops. And really 90% of the properties were mom and pops back then. Yeah. But this guy took me out and we started looking at it and he showed me his simple little Excel sheet he was using. This is a REIT. I mean, this is upper tier of the industry. And, they're using simple little Excel sheets. I'm like this sophisticated broker using Argus self-storage and whatever. It was, Argus financial analysis software. And I'm in a coat and tie and he's in jeans. And it was, but when I really saw what storage was, we had basically built that building when I was doing flex space.
Right.
Back then, you would get $350 a foot for a warehouse. I saw these guys getting back then in '95 $9 to $12 a square foot for the same thing. It was like apartment rent. And anyway, so I thought, how can a guy, once I really got it, and there's no commissions, no tenant improvements, the few capital expenses you have, you can schedule. So once I really saw what it was, I thought, how can a guy like me get in this business? And the only thing I really could do was find deals back then. I didn't have really much money to invest, and I wasn't strong enough to go on a loan. So I had to get investors and get partners. Decided to get in that business, and I closed on my first storage facility in 1999.
Yeah, I think from talking to so many people who got into self-storage, that light bulb moment is really, it comes from a lot of people who have played around in multifamily, but that wasn't your background. But it's kind of that no tenant, no toilet situation. What can really go wrong here? And this is back in the 90s when you weren't thinking of the kind of upgrade of conversion that you can do now electronically and getting out, the operator. So it must have been interesting then to even see the scale of it, just because there was so much coming in and out. And most people, there's no wear and tear on it. People barely ever even go there, especially back then.
Yeah, it was a different business. Of course, it had its challenges back then too, just like we have our challenges today, different challenges. Back then, there was no SBA lending.
Right.
I can remember sitting in banks that would say, we would never loan on self-storage. It's a specialty built product. You lose all your tenants, you can't do anything with the building. That same bank loaned me millions of dollars down the road.
Right.
But it had its own challenges back then. But being in the management business I was in, we weren't setting shoots up and tenant didn't pay. We auctioned their stuff. There's no evictions. It was, you technically don't have a landlord-tenant relationship. You're a warehouseman, and what people store in your storage unit is chattel, and you have lien rights on their chattel. So it's like a 20 cent on the dollar insurance policy on your income stream.
Yeah. Was location back then even more important because the internet was available, but not like it is now?
It's weird. It's really weird. Back then, in the first generation storage, when I say that, I'm talking about 70s and 80s kind of stuff.
Yeah.
Really, the people used to hide it.
Wow. Oh, okay.
They would hide it.
That's interesting.
That was like that was the security feature. They would put opaque walls up and say, no one knows your stuff is back here. And it was all yellow pages, man, all yellow pages. 88% of our, I can't remember the exact number, but of our new leases came from yellow pages.
Interesting. Yeah, it's fine. As you were saying it, I was starting to think, back to that time. And I remember myself just looking for things in the yellow pages, pre-internet, for those of us who were there. And that really was a viable way. It's why people started to name things AAA storage and stuff. They just wanted to be at the top of the list.
My first brand in the 90s started with an A.
Yeah.
Ameristore.
It's interesting, though, because the industry has changed, but there still are things that still run the same. You do want to be in a secure location, but now it's easier to advertise and for people to just find it via Google Maps. So you don't really need as much of that straight location for people to drive by. But it's interesting to know that even in the beginning, drive-by was actually not important because it kind of was more about how can we keep your stuff safe? And there wasn't as much technology advanced there to keep it safe any other way.
By the time I was getting in it, visibility became more and more important. And it really is today. It's a real estate play. Yes, you value self-storage the same way you would run values on apartments and office buildings. But the reality is it's a retail business. It's an operating business. It's like building a shopping center and then opening the store in the center.
Yeah, but I would suppose back then, 90s, that the same data pack that you had available is not certainly what you had now in terms of traffic patterns and population growth. I mean, you had a much more limited set of data to work off then, right?
Yes, yes. Now, I was getting feasibility reports in the early 2000s. Our process is we'll identify an opportunity, whether it's a expansion, a conversion, or ground up development. We get we put it under put it under contract, and get an independent third party feasibility report that basically looks at that trade area. What's going on in Denver's interesting, but mostly irrelevant. What's going on in that market area, that 3 to 5 mile or whatever your trade area is, that's everything. And the good news about storage is nothing is more localized than storage. People will drive across a town to shop, to work, to go to an office building, to retail, but nobody's like driving across Denver because they think the doors look cool on this facility. You rent your customers. For us in our portfolios, 86 point something % of our customers live 3.2 miles from our facility.
Yeah, that makes sense, because who wants to drive a long way to get their stuff that they're storing? I mean, that's the whole point. And then maybe that's part of the reason why storage exploded. In some ways, they saw the value of it, and then people started to see it. But it's an interesting time now, if we just fast forward to a second, because if housing's becoming less affordable, it means people have to move into smaller places. Storage, to me, has always been something that I see as recession proof. Over your career, does that play out as something? Because if you can buy bigger houses, you need to store bigger things that maybe don't go in there. But if you're downsizing, you need it. Recessions, you still need storage. I don't see any way that storage really fails other than operationally. Am I right about that?
There's a few ways you can, where you can fail. There's some risk in a few of the deals. So I would say self-storage is recession-resistant. I don't think anything's recession-proof. But I would say yes. So if you think about self-storage, the customers, what I discovered was our customer base is basically going through some kind of change, most likely in their life. Very often they call it the 3Ds: death, divorce, are two of them. Yeah. But, very often somebody's going through a change. They need more space. They've sold their house and they're moving to another one. Their parents die and they need to put their stuff somewhere while they figure out what to do with it. But the thing about storage is boom times create demand for storage, because boom times in the economy create change. Recessions create demand for self-storage because recessions create changes in people's lives. In COVID, the first 2 months, everything shut down, but our occupancy, everybody's occupancy went up. COVID created demand for self-storage.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, people were bringing in more stuff because they couldn't go anywhere, so they need to put some of the stuff somewhere. There's only so many things you can order on Amazon and keep inside the house.
What I've discovered, the risk of self-storage is, one, the risk is if you're adding more space, like doing an expansion, buy 25,000, add 25,000, or you're doing ground up development. While you're in lease up to stabilization, that's really kind of your risk period. I have never seen, I'm not saying it hadn't happened, I've just never seen it. I've never seen a stabilized self-storage facility go from profitable to unprofitable and broke. I've just never seen it. I've seen some self-storage at auction, but usually, in most cases, of what at least that I've bid on, literally the storage has been additional collateral. I had one real close to where I live. It was storage behind a shopping center. Shopping center didn't lease up. Storage was stabilized, but they auctioned them both together. So that's the risk period. The other thing about self-storage today is that from the recession in 2008, there were in the commercial investment world, there were 3 shining stars that performed okay or well during the 2008 recession. One was medical office,
Mm.
2 was student housing, and 3 was self-storage. Now, if you think about medical office, I mean, what are you? In '08, you were $200-300 a foot to build that.
Mm-hmm.
Student housing is like a resort almost. A lot of
Yeah.
student housing today. Storage, back then, I was building it at $50 a square foot. And I was building stuff that REITs bought. So that's when all the money, after the recession, that's when the money started flowing into self-storage because people really got it.
Yeah, and I guess because of your CCIM and then the connections to REITs, you kind of could build exactly what they were looking for. They gave you a blueprint when you started out looking for things, and you figured out, hey, well, I can just build it, right? You really had the inside track on that.
That was my model. Now, that's not the only model. That's not to say that my model is the best model. It was just my model. It was a way that I could create a story that would attract investors.
Yeah.
And it was true. I built our strategy was, for the most part, we would buy mom and pop facilities, and there's still a lot of them. Still over 62% of all self-storage facilities are owned by people who just own one.
Yeah.
And,
interesting. Yeah.
Now the REITs are consolidating and getting more and more of the industry, which is where the opportunity is, I think. But that was our model. We'd buy 25,000 square feet, add another 20, because I knew REITs want at least 50,000 square feet or more. And then we would add the other features like the security features, the retail features, all the things that REITs want.
Yeah, and once you know that, also when you're looking, and even if you're not on a build, if you're looking on that addition, it's pretty easy to locate. You're looking for self-storage with X amount of units plus X amount of space. So the formula to get there was pretty simple for you to look. You could just say, no, that won't work. A REIT's not going to buy that, and then move to something that has enough land to get the amount of square footage that you want, right?
Yes. One of the things, I have a few little side businesses, and I consult and coach and train and have online courses on storage. But I tell the people I work with, my business transformed once I got clear on what my strategy was and what my benchmark numbers were. I mean, I was using other people's money, so I knew what I had to get in terms of return, and I knew what I had to get in the way of a finished product. And once I had those pieces in place, life got very simple. As I would look at deals, it was either a yes or a no.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense to me, because like as a self-storage buyer, your option is you can run the facility and run it like a business and earn off that and keep that as an asset. But there's a lot of people who've transformed that, like you saying, and they want to sell it to those bigger hedge funds, REITs, and things like that. And to do that, you need to operationalize everything, because they don't want to do that. They want to take a perfectly finished product. And that's where the value add now is working for those companies in the middle, right?
Yeah, that was what, and everybody's strategy is different. My initial strategy was, you talk about pivots, my initial strategy was I wanted to use other people's money to build a portfolio. And then what I would do is refinance it with institutional non-recourse financing. My partners could stay in, albeit much smaller percentage, or we'd buy them out, whatever they want. We did a lot of that. But between, let's say, 2012 and 2019, I helped put together 2 brands. One was a more urban brand. One was a more single-story drive-up suburban type product. And in both cases, we ended up selling those portfolios in 2019. Starting in 2018, completing the last sale in 2020. January. So I had no idea that I was selling it necessarily the height of the market.
Yeah.
Well, I just knew that the cap rates were so low that there was no way, even if I upped my net operating income $100,000, if cap rates went up 1 or 2%, I would never see a return like this. So I ended up selling those brands off as much as I didn't want to. That wasn't my initial business model, but we ended up doing it so we could, maximize the return for our partners.
Yeah, you said something important in there, though, because I think that a lot of people look at storage now and they're thinking of the big flashy, things that REITs are building or that get sold to REITs, but there's still a lot of money left in those mom and pop self-storage, even for operators who want to do it, because in smaller towns, they don't need the flashy thing with all the electronic entry and something. They need to put tractors in there. So it's really a business model that can still work in kind of an older school way and still make money without all the bells and whistles of the new things, which obviously work in more urban settings or more traffic-based settings, right?
Yeah, exactly. Even today, that's like where I'm focused, with the people I work with, that's where we're focused in most cases. In 2000, let's say 15 or 14, I'd be focused in kind of the inner belt of Houston, Texas, for example. Mm-hmm. Now I'm like looking for opportunities outside the third belt, but maybe in the Houston MSA.
Yeah, right.
That's where the opportunities are today, in my opinion.
Yeah, that's interesting, though, because it goes back and forth. But I think if you look at the value of storage, as we were talking about before, locationally, it can work in almost any place if you do it right, because I don't see any time, as we were saying, where people are going to not need it or not have an option for the usability. Hey, it's Jonathan. I hope you're enjoying this storage episode with industry veteran Mark Helm. And if you're interested in Mark's book, Creating Wealth Through Self-Storage, there's going to be a link in the show notes at the end of this show. Now, self-storage has become super popular in the last several years, but Mark has been doing this since the beginning. So he is absolutely the resource that you need if you haven't figured it out through the first half of the episode. Let's keep going for the rest. When you're looking at self-storage to purchase, the way that you do it, I guess the occupancy doesn't matter as much if you're looking for additions or to ground it up to turn it in and sell it to a REIT, or are you looking for some type of occupancy level that's lower so you can upsell it like that? Let me know about that stuff.
So I'll just give you kind of the classic example. Yeah. There's all types of opportunities, but very often what we've discovered is that mom and pop operators, in other words, the vast majority of storage owners, tend to get very complacent with their cash flow.
Yeah.
In their world, it's better to have somebody in there paying something than have, quote, an empty unit. Right. So we don't argue with them, and we agree, and we look at it. But in my world, I'd rather, because I can now run and figure out what the supply demand is. I always get the feasibility to validate it, but I'm not going in blind now with all the subscription. I know what the square foot per capita is. I know what the income is. I know now. I love markets where the storage rent is less than apartment rent. Apartment rent's $1.35 or $1.50 a foot, and storage rent is coming in at $1.12. I'd love that. So those are all stuff I didn't know when I got started, but I look for those things. Then we will go in and do whatever capital improvements need to be done to bring that not to maybe the best in the market, but the best that facility can be given its location. And then we attempt to raise the rents. I have no problem having 10, 20% of the occupancy go somewhere else. And then I improve the property and we re-rent it at higher rents. When somebody gets behind, we don't do payment plans with them. They can pay me 50% of what they owe me and go. Or we're going to auction. And we don't let that stuff trail out. And we can usually increase just before we add our first new unit or even have our first price increase. I can usually go 6 to 12% on the current tenants I have, improving the cash flow. And then usually we'll add more space and kind of reposition that product in the marketplace.
Yeah, I found that the magic in self-storage is in those price increases, because the aggravation to a self-storage renter to move their stuff is so high that there's very little incentive to go do it for anything under a 10% increase. I mean, at 10%, you might start to think, you know what, maybe I'll move this stuff. But then when you calculate it, and it's like it's going to be $650 to move all your stuff to another storage unit that's going to do the same thing, that they're just going to stay unless they're getting rid of the unit. That's really I think, in the magic of the business. Am I right about that?
Yes, they tend to be very sticky. Every now and then, so we would have now, we didn't always have really huge jumps. Dynamic pricing is now the financial model that's in most markets that basically adjusts the rents like an airplane ticket, up and down based on supply and demand. I'm not the biggest fan of that. I've used variations of it. I always felt like dynamic pricing for subscription models kind of dicey. And in essence, self-storage is a subscription model, a monthly payment that can stop at any time. So our marketing and our positioning is, although we do offer some entry prices and I do offer specials, especially when I'm in lease up, but I very often will compete directly against the REITs who are really the masters of dynamic pricing. And I will tell them, we'll run ads, video ads saying, tired of your price increases? Come to our facility. I'll lock your rate in for whatever month or so. Yeah, but raising rents, you can't just do it willy-nilly, but raising rents is like part of the business. And if you run your storage like a business, not just like a mom and pop operator, there's a lot of value in that. And the real art, that I talked about in the book, the real art is knowing, you might not do it every year, but having your income increase be higher than your operation increase. What I've discovered is most owners are clueless about what their operating increase expense was, how it went up in percentage wise compared to their rent. But that compounds over time. And that's what creates the wealth in self-storage, in my opinion.
Yeah, I've found, similar to what you said, that the complacence of the mom and pop self-storage one-unit owner is absolutely unbelievable when you make direct contact with them. But it in some ways, it kind of makes sense. It's not like owning an old apartment building. They always have low rents, but they're still always hit up by the people because they need repairs. Self-storage, nobody's contacting you. So it is almost like, well, I'm getting this steady income. I have 15 units. I don't really need to upgrade it. But when you go and talk to them, you're just amazed. Like, you're half as much as everybody else in town. They're like, well, it's okay for me. And that's why those are good buys, right?
Oh, yes. Now, I will say coming across opportunities is, at least in my experience, is more challenging today than it ever has been since I've been in. Primarily for three reasons. One is, after the 2008 recession, a lot of institutional money flowed into the space. That's when you started seeing self-storage go up all over the place, especially these big multi-story, 100% climate-controlled buildings. Nothing wrong with them, but there's just a ton of them. So in many markets and many trade areas are overbuilt right now. And then you couple that with the higher interest rates, and particularly the high construction costs. I've got to analyze 2 to 3 times more deals before we find our opportunities.
Yeah, that's interesting, because one of the biggest benefits to self-storage, especially back when you were started, was the construction costs. They were so much less than everything else in terms of the income that they could generate.
Still is less than other asset classes. But it just takes... It's harder to pencil out, and literally I have to be willing to take less of a return now up front and organize my financing in such a way that if and when interest rates do drop, I don't think they'll ever go back to 4%, which is what we were paying 4 to 4.5% on commercial loans. I don't think they'll get back there. I don't need them back there, actually. I hope they don't go back there, but I do want them below, especially during the construction phase. Very often in construction financing, it's interest only, but you're usually indexed to prime rate. And then very often once you're leased up or stabilized, you can negotiate your interest to some other index like, T-bills or something. But during construction, most loans are pretty much indexed to prime rate.
Yeah.
And so it's kind of hot.
Do you prefer doing full ground up on a blank slate to the additions because then you're kind of have to add to somebody else's building, or does it really just a numbers game for you?
I've done ground up development, and I'll tell you where I've made the most money is in conversions. Now, I don't think for us, I like having a mixture of all. So we've got, but expansions where you buy existing self-storage, add more. Conversions where you buy empty buildings and convert it to self-storage and ground up. I've done all, but if I had a preference, it would be conversions and expansions. And I like it because it might sound crazy, but even in conversions, I can get existing cash flow. So if I've got in every conversion I've done except one, I think, we will buy an empty building and we'll phase into self-storage, and I'll lease the other part out. It could be indoor parking. It could be warehouse. It could be at least it's sign companies. But I will get rent on the part I'm not developing as self-storage while I lease up my self-storage. And when you buy expansions, you got cash flow, albeit I might not be getting the return I want at the price I paid for the existing 25,000 feet or whatever it is. But by the time I do my expansion, add it, lease it up, I've got a good return.
Yeah, and a conversion right now just makes more sense given there's a dearth of opportunity of just blank commercial real estate out there. And it's a much easier to convert to self-storage than to convert to apartments because you don't have to, you're going down in plumbing instead of going way up. We're just keeping it equal. That's an advantage for putting in self-storage. I guess it just operationally doesn't make sense to be, a corner unit in a strip mall. That's kind of the thing that there's so many buildings available. Are you seeing that there's options, but they just don't really work for self-storage as an asset class where they are?
Sometimes zoning depends on the market. Zoning can be an issue, but I like conversions. So if I'm working with people today, here's how I look at conversions today is if I'm looking, it usually happens when I'm looking at expansion. So I find a self-storage deal, and as I'm running the numbers, I analyze that market. I really like that market. I mean, incomes could be high or employment good, or supply of self-storage could be lower than most places I'm looking. I can't make that deal work for whatever reason, but I really like this market area. That's when I start really focusing on conversions. And I will very often employ, a real estate agent in that market to help me find a building. The other thing I like about conversions, ever since, 2012, 2013, storage has been in such demand that negotiating due diligence time periods sometimes can be a little difficult. Very often we're closing on the deals before I have my expansion approved. I've got a good feeling about it, but, I don't have it. I don't have my building plans yet, but I've got to close on the deal if we're going to do this opportunity. When I'm buying something other than self-storage, it's a lot easier to negotiate the time length I need to get my development approval, get my building plans, and get all my pricing right in a row. So that's another reason I like them.
Yeah, I mean, it just seems that storage has expanded so much. There's lots of different ways to get into it. For somebody who's interested in getting into self-storage, would you recommend that they get into, somebody who's running a syndication on self-storage first so they can learn a little? Or do you think it's still...
That's a great way of doing it. But a lot depends on the syndication. A lot depends on what that person's goals are, why they want to get into self-storage. Some people want to get in on one or two to create a retirement vehicle. So they might take all their excess, they got good W-2 income. They're taking any excess cash flow, knocking that debt down. So when their retirement hits, they're free and clear or very low in debt. That's one approach. Very valid. Other people want to just build a portfolio. It's okay to get in as a passive investor in a syndication. You'll learn. You might not learn as much.
Yeah. You kind of get an overview
yeah,
rather
you kind
than
of
a
get an
handhold.
overview. But a lot would depend on what their goals are. But if their goals are to run and operate a business, you're not going to get a whole lot of that from passive investing in storage. What I would do is either do a small one yourself or get a partner and do it. But there's just a lot of entry points, and ultimately it just depends on what somebody's goals are, long-term and short-term goals are.
Yeah, and if you go back to what we said in the beginning, I mean, operationally, these are pretty easy to run. No real tenants, very limited on the toilets. Not really a fire hazard. Metal buildings, block buildings. Like as a business to run, this is not the hardest one. But you can do it well. But as you're saying, there are ways to mess up if you don't pay attention.
Yeah, exactly. That's kind of why I like it, because you don't have to be the smartest tool and sharpest tool in the shed to do it. But we keep our eye. We have, everybody's are a little different, but we have about 5 KPIs, key performance indicators, we use for every facility. And our managers, today there's a lot of automation, but if you have our managers knew what those were and knew that their bonus depended on them. And, 5 things to keep your eye on is not that many.
Yeah, and as in the old days, there was always an on-site manager. Now, are you seeing more that there's kind of one manager for 5 facilities because so much of it is automated, but they can kind of rotate themselves between the two, and you don't really need somebody on site at self-storage anymore with all of the access availability?
Well, a lot of folks do believe that. I have one that's an automated facility now. I still think it's tied into the size of the facility. Now, a lot of third-party management companies that specialize in automated will tell you it doesn't. But I just know if I've got 50, 60, 80,000 square feet, there's stuff happening there. And there's enough income to pay a manager. Plus, we like the customer service that managers offer. So if at all possible, I want a manager. Even if I have a small, when I say small, 25, 30,000 square foot that's going to be run automatedly. Yeah. When I'm in lease up, I have I have somebody there to sell space because I relate to it like a retail business. But that's just kind of my model. It's not the best model. It's just the model I like and I'm comfortable with. I tell you what, though, technology, you don't have to be fully automated to take advantage of all the automation and technology involved. When I first got into business, I don't know why I started tracking this, but I try to track everything. But I was making $250,000 of gross income per full-time employee. Today, I'm earning $380,000 of gross income per full-time employee. And the difference has been the technology.
Right. And still using your philosophy that you'd rather have somebody on site. It does. You made a really, really good point that in the lease up phase, having someone on site is important, but that also does go to the amount of units you had. I like what you said, because the bigger the facility, something's going on. It's not a high volume walk in, walk out business, but a lot of things happen and people are storing very valuable things in storage. So I find it helpful. I guess there were times where I liked it when nobody was around. And then there were other times, depending on what I had in there, that I felt a little bit better that somebody was at least sitting in an office at least the 9 to 5 sometimes.
Well, maybe I'm showing my age, but that's just my preference. And I like our managers to walk around, interface with the customer base. My experience is the relationship the manager has between the customer. I mean, the customers don't know me.
Yeah.
But they sure know the managers. And when times get tough or something changes in their life and they have a relationship with that manager, in most cases, they'll pay that bill and not pay another bill.
Yeah.
And that's another reason. We try to keep our physical occupancy and our economic occupancy within 3 to 5% of each other. And a lot of that ability, in my humble opinion, is a function of the relationship the managers have with the tenant base. So we would look for certain traits in our managers as we would proceed
I think that makes a lot of sense to me. I mean, I can see people going into a city market and just running SEO and ads and just assuming it's all going to happen online. But I think that this is more of I think hopefully business is going to get, more humanized, even though it's getting, artificially intelligentized all the time. I just see that really can't go away. Like you're saying, you always want someone there to answer a question. So there at least needs to be a direct way to contact somebody who is running the facility. If you're just going to an automated system and it goes to VAs, eventually I don't think that's going to work very well against what else is out there.
It can work. It's just I like more of the personal touch. But again, that's me. And even in our automated facilities, I want to see, I want to see somebody on the phone that knows that facility and will be with that customer as they walk to on the phone as they walk to their unit. That's just been my experience. And we try to separate ourselves a little bit. And that's one of the ways that a company can do that. But I tell you, the biggest challenge we have today is finding the opportunities that can work. In the old days, I could go into a market where 10 by 10s were, $60 a month, and I could do an expansion and the numbers work great. Today, with construction costs being where they are, what's interesting is that in those two brands that I built and ended up selling, one to a REIT, one to a fund out of New York, we did all of the construction ourselves. Now, I don't have a construction background, but self-storage is not that complicated. I would hire, if I was out of town, I would hire a construction manager very often.
Yeah.
But we would work with the fabricators to get plans and local engineers and architects, and we were able to build at $50 a foot. In other words, a 10 by 10 would cost me $5,000 to build.
Yeah.
And if I'm getting $60 a month rent, well, for whatever reason, for us, I noticed it was after the pandemic, all of a sudden the banks now were requiring me to have GCs to do it.
Yeah.
And it's not like I'm this great construction person, but we would hire the subs, decide what system we were going to have fabricated, work directly with that company or the directors of that company and build it and just do the projects. And out of town, we have construction managers. Now we have to do GCs. Okay. So I started getting bids after the pandemic was over. I'm coming back out, albeit on a smaller level. Yeah. And I'm working with people primarily that I've worked with in my training and coaching over the last 10 years. But all of a sudden, I'm getting bids $120 a foot.
Yeah, that's an eye-opener.
I was building for $50.
Yeah.
Lowest was $95. So all of a sudden, that effectively put us out of the business of buying mom and pop and expanding it. So I would have to be going in markets where the rents were pushing $17 a foot, kind of thing. So I did what most entrepreneurs do when they have a problem. You create a company to solve it. So I said, if I need a GC, then I'll try to start a company with a GC. So I ended up connecting with somebody I know locally who had built, not storage, but been in the commercial construction, casino business, horse racing, built, large buildings, multi-billion-dollar buildings. And, but he was looking for a way he has a very entrepreneurial streak in him. Yeah. And I talked to him about storage and told him the process I used to build. And anyway, we ended up forming a self-storage construction company. And so when I was getting bids at $120 a foot, we're now bringing in much higher than 50, but 75 to 80 kind of range. And we build our stuff, the stuff I'm involved in, and we have a few other clients, people in our kind of local network. But that's one of the ways I tackled one of our biggest challenges today, which is construction costs.
And that's your company, Resolve Self-Storage, right?
Yeah, Resolve Self-Storage Construction Company.
Yeah, so that can help them obviously find it, but also build it.
Yes, and it's not for everyone. It's not for every storage project. Like I would not, if I was building a 130,000 5-story, you need to start, use design build method. But what we do is where we particularly save a lot of money is up front in the design portion, rather than leaning on an architect or even an engineer very heavily. We lean heavily on the fabricators. They provide the engineered drawings. Then we give those to an architect and engineer, and they're just responding to our plans rather than creating them. So we typically will say 50 to 100,000 just before we move the first piece of dirt.
Yeah. Awesome. Is that the best place for people to get in touch with you, at resolveself-storage.com?
That's a good place. The other website I have is creatingwealththroughselfstorage.com. I have a lot of free
that's your
training.
book also.
That's the name of the book. That's the name of the website. I have a lot of free training there. And then I also have links to courses, both free and paid for, that are online. You can take at your own leisure. I also, once or so, will run a virtual boot camp. I don't do the in-person anymore. I just do the virtual. Sometimes I'll run a seminar at some of the national conventions prior to the convention, and I'm usually, not always, but usually speaking at the Inside Self-Storage Convention in Las Vegas every spring. Be there this year speaking.
Yeah, before we hop off, though, when you wrote your book, Creating Wealth Through Self-Storage, was that has to be one of the first self-storage books, because that was like 2014 or 2015?
15. It got published in 2015.
Yeah, I mean, that must have been a revelation, because I don't remember a book on self-storage before that, and I know I was probably looking.
There probably were. I just didn't see any, and I wrote it. So at the time, I was doing a lot of syndicating, and I was trying to basically create a big business card. But I talked about how I did business, my philosophy on it, and it ended up, I love doing syndications and having partners, but it's one thing to help a wealthy person make a good return. It's another thing to help somebody buy their first self-storage facility.
Yeah.
And for me, that's where the juice ended up being. And that's what that book and the training and the website and the consulting and coaching I do has allowed me. I don't have a whole lot of one-on-one people I coach. I don't work with more than 5 people at once.
Yeah.
But I love helping somebody get in this business.
Yeah. I love it. Well, I really appreciate your time. It's great to have an industry veteran on to talk about the beginnings of self-storage and then going through it now. So I really appreciate you spending the time with us.
Well, thank you. Jonathan, one thing I'd like to do before we end is I'd like to acknowledge you. I've listened to a ton of your podcasts.
I appreciate it.
What I really specifically appreciate about you is your ability to, you call it a mindful approach, take a mindful approach. What I notice is you're really, for the most part, out of the competitive plane of business, and you're in the creative, or which you call the mindful plane of business. And as you create wealth, you throw a ladder down behind you for other people to come up. Very often on the competitive plane, somebody who creates their wealth kind of kicks the ladder down, but you help and bring others along with you. And I really acknowledge you for that. That's what I've noticed about your podcast. And I think the world at this point can use more people like you.
Oh, Mark, I really appreciate it. It means a lot to me. I mean, I did start this and continue it with that same mindset, but that means a lot. I don't think of real estate investing. You're a veteran as well as I. I never thought it was competitive. And I think it was because I grew up with my dad, who was friends with everybody and would share deals with partners. And, he had friends and he would help people out by throwing them into a deal. And I learned about tenancy from him and understanding that. So I think I grew up like that. And I'm glad that I can continue his legacy on by kind of doing it this way. But yeah, no, I really appreciate you saying that. And it's humbling to be able to talk to so many investors who've been in it so long and get out your great wisdom to somebody who could be listening this, not thinking that self-storage was a thing for them, and then listen to this whole episode and they're like, wait, there are 3 in this town that look like they need help, and they could be on a whole new journey.
Yeah. Well, your abundance mindset comes forth through your podcast.
Yeah.
So
really appreciate
you for that.
Thanks so much for spending the time. That was Mark Helm. You can find him at resolveself-storage.com and at creatingwealththroughselfstorage.com. I'm Jonathan Green. We'll see you next episode. Thanks for sticking around to the end so you can get a preview of who's coming up on the next episode of Zen and the Art of Real Estate Investing. And next episode, number 222, my guest is Stephen Petaski. He's the CEO and founder of the Luxus Group. Now, at Luxus, they say it's where luxury is not just a name, it's a way of life. And we're talking about a luxury vacation rental and lifestyle company with the highest end luxury vacation rentals out there. This is a great conversation and an interesting take on short-term rentals in the rental business as we go Lux next week with Stephen.